imagine going to college. How many of you have an engineer in your family? How many of you have like a science person in your family, either medicine or chemistry, physics? How many of you know what you want to be when you grow up? Liars. Okay. I certainly did. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. I've told this is like 20-20-20 in terms of format. I have a canned presentation, but if you have questions, let's make it interactive. Otherwise, you're all going to fall asleep. Okay? So I belong to this glorious institution called Stanford University, which is down the road. And I was talking to Olivia because we know each other for a long time. I said, okay, I have to do the commensurate family photos, so that way you know that I'm one of you. All right. So this is my dad is here in the center, and he grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and that Adobe building that you see behind him was the family homestead. That is, the mansion that they grew up in. And this is my mom and my sisters and I, with my mom and dad, in front of my grandparents used to live, well, they lived in a house right next to the cemetery in San Diego, in the hood. And this is a photo of my family and me when I came back from Stanford my freshman year at Thanksgiving. And this is at my Aunt Mercy's house, and my Aunt Mercy's house. You know how that show Hoarders and Clutter and all that? That was Aunt Mercy's house. So I grew up in San Diego in East County in a bedroom community that was mostly agricultural at the time, and they were beginning to build these housing tracts. And it was dull as dishwater. There was nothing to do. Really, really nothing. There was no mall. It was very boring. I was a really very good student. My parents decided that they wanted to buy a home, which in 1959 was unusual for Mexican Americans because they didn't buy homes. One was that they didn't have the capital to do it, but the other was that there was so much redlining. So if you wanted to buy a home, you actually couldn't get a loan to do it. And my dad decided he wanted to buy a house. And so they went from building development to building development until they found one where the sellers would actually sell the house to them. And it was out in Santee, which was out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, but that was pretty bold at that time. And because prior to that, in terms of my extended family, unless it was a home that they built themselves, they didn't go and buy a new house. Okay, and so I grew up there. My grandfather lived with us. My grandfather is that old guy up there, which is, there he is, right there. And my dad's family, they're all Yaqui Indians from Tucson and Sonora. So, feather in our hair. My mother's family is from Zacatecas in Mexico, and they came over, they lived in Tijuana for a period of time. My grandfather was a bracero in the 1940s and 50s, and then he would go back to Mexico, get my grandmother pregnant, and then come back to the United States. So they had 9 daughters. And they're all kind of interestingly spaced along with their growing seasons. So that's my background. No college education to speak of on my father's side. Although my grandfather did go to the University of Arizona in 1918 for a year, but he didn't finish. Back then, it was just having a little bit of college education was a big deal, especially if you were Yaqui. It just didn't happen. On my mother's side, they didn't have any college education at all. My mother didn't get her GED until she was in her 60s. My father didn't get his high school degree. He dropped out of high school at 15, went to work in construction, went into the Army, came back, worked in construction, and then he went to night school back then. And he got his high school degree when he was 30. So, how did I end up at Stanford? My dad was very much a Chicano rights guy, back in the day, and he was very much focused because there were so many women in his family. He married a woman who had 8 sisters, so automatically he had 8 little sisters, and so he became very interested and focused on women's empowerment, not only Chicano empowerment but women's empowerment. So, from that height, I heard my dad talk to my aunts and anyone who would listen about the importance of going to school and improving yourself. And one time I had a cousin who came to and said, hey Theo, I'm gonna go study to be a nurse's aide. And he goes, that's great. If you're gonna study to be a nurse's aide, why don't you study to be a nurse? And if you're gonna study to be a nurse, why don't you study to be a doctor? You know, if you're going to go for it, and that was his message over and over and over again. It's like, why are you, that's great that you set this goal, but it's too low. You know, if you're going to go through all that effort, really do something. And I think that sometimes, especially when you're coming from a minority community, we tend to play it too safe. Or what we think is safe, something that's a sure thing. You know, I'm going to go get a job, so I'm going to drop out of school because I need to support my extended family and provide an extra income. And that's a very noble thing. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But what happens is that we compromise our future to take care of the present. Right? And what happens, as my father would often say, and you're still living in that broken down apartment 10 years later. You didn't get out of that trap. You know, you didn't create a path out of there. So when my dad told me, he read an article in Reader's Digest. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Reader's Digest. Before there was Facebook, there was Reader's Digest. Okay? When you want to read, you know, the Facebook feed and you're reading random little articles and stuff. Okay, well, people used to subscribe to something called Reader's Digest. And it would be, they would get articles from Time and Newsweek and Wall Street Journal and all this stuff, right? But they would condense it. It was like the cliff notes of the articles, and you would get it. And so he read an article in Reader's Digest in 1970, who knows what, saying that engineering was going to be the career of the future. And so he said, Mija, you're going to study being an engineer. I go, okay. And so when I applied to school, I only applied to 3 schools. And this was back in the day when we didn't have AP. Okay, so my high school had no AP. All you had to do was be a really good student. I wanted to get the hell out of Santee because it was so boring. So I took a lot of classes, graduated high school in 3 years. And yeah, I'm out of here, it's so dull. I mean, I want to go to a big city, right? So I applied to 3 schools, got in, who knows why. And one of the schools I got into was Stanford. The other 2 were on the East Coast. And my dad said, Mija, you're not going to the East Coast. It's too far away. Okay, I'm not going to the East Coast. Okay, I'll go to this school called Stanford that I've barely heard of, but I really liked the brochure. And the reason why is they had a brochure that was reaching out to Hispanics. And so they had some Spanish on it. I know this is like big life decision is made on the stupidest data, right? I liked the brochure and it said something like, Stanford C for me or something, I don't know. It was some stupid slogan. I thought, oh, I'll apply there, and I got in. And also, I have to tell you, this was like my get out of jail free card, because when I was growing up, if you were a Mexican-American woman, you weren't ever going to leave home until you got married. Someone had to put a ring on it, otherwise you were going to live with your parents for the rest of your life. And I had aunts who lived with my grandmother in the house next to the cemetery who were 35 years old, and they were still living at home, and they never got their own apartment because they weren't married, and they couldn't move out. And I was like, oh, poor Aunt Valentina. When she would have dates over, there would be some grown man sitting on the couch with all these women staring at him. And if she wanted to have a private conversation, she had to go outside, and they had to go sit in the car. And then my abuelita would be looking like, is there anything going on? And she was like a 30-something-year-old woman. Thank God Valentina got married. She finally moved out of the house next to the cemetery. I thought, oh my God, I'm just going to die. I mean, if that's what the deal is. So I figured that the legitimate excuse that I would have to leave home is if I went to college. And I thought, if I'm going to go to college, I'm not applying to any school in San Diego. Because if I do that, they're going to make me live at home. So that was the plan. So that's how I ended up at Stanford, because I wanted to get out of Santee. I didn't want to live with my parents for the rest of my life. And I wanted to be an engineer, which I had never heard of. Now, I arrived at Stanford, and the first person I meet is someone in an engineering program. They go, oh yeah, so what are you going to major in engineering? I go, what kind? And I'm going like, there are kinds? He was like, yeah, like, are you going to be an ME or a double E? And I go, what's an ME? Like mechanical. Then that's when I discovered that there is no such thing as engineering. There's mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, petroleum engineering, and I go, I don't know. And so, okay, another major life decision made on very sparse data. I chose to be a petroleum engineering major because, what do you think? Exactly. So in 1979, petroleum engineering majors made more money than anyone else. So I said, if I'm going to be an engineer, of course I'll be a petroleum engineer because I'll get the highest salary. You know, who wants to be a civil? Ugh. You know, they make no money. So I majored in petroleum petroleum engineering. Did I know anything about petroleum engineering? Had I ever met anyone who? No. So I go into this program and it's awful because it's oil and gas. You know? And I gutted it out for 4 years. It was like boot camp. It was doing something that I had no affinity for, but I had made the commitment. And then it was like, Miha's a petroleum engineering major at Stanford. You know, I'm screwed. I couldn't get out of it. But it was like one of the worst, best decision I ever made, because even though my grades were horrible, let me tell you, it was like horrible. I'm never going to show my son my college grades. What it taught me was I could learn anything. Even though the physics killed me, I could learn it. I really could. And it just meant I had to kill myself to learn it. You know? And so what was interesting is I went through high school and it was really, really easy. How many of you went to high school and it felt easy? You kind of breeze through, la 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 la, yeah, I don't have to study, just ace it, man. Got it. And then you get to college and you hit that wall, and all of a sudden you go la 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 your freshman year, and you go like, ugh, what happened? Yeah, Stanford was like 4 years old. What happened? But it was great because I got over my ego. I actually got study habits. I learned to work really, really hard, and I learned that if I just really grind, if I just did the grind long enough, I would learn it and I could figure it out. And you know what? To this day, nobody asks me what my GPA at Stanford was. You know? Good thing. Because all they see is a degree. They went, oh, you went to Stanford. They don't even ask for my major. Because then I have to explain this obscure degree called petroleum engineering, which still makes a lot of money, but not as much as if you were a Google engineer, so really you want to study computer science. If you're out there with money, study computer science. So I did that, and then I got into the world of startups. How are we doing on time? Oh, I better wrap this up. So went and did a startup back in the day when software was sold in Ziploc bags on floppy disks. Okay, so we started a company called Black Gold Software, because you know, it's oil and gas software. And before there were computers, I know this is a long time ago, you're going to have to Google it, people used calculators.
No way.
And in the oil and gas industry, we wrote programs for calculators, and they were on these little magnetic strips. And so you were God. You know how everyone's flashing their iPhone is like, ooh, their status, like, you know, big guy. Well, back then it was like, did you have an HP 41C or did you have a TI 59 calculator? Because those things cost $1,000. So if you had one, like you had, it was like the equivalent of an iPhone. All right, and you had bragging rights because that, you know. And then people would say like, well, which one is better? No, my 41C is better. It's like, you know, Windows versus Mac. It was that sort of thing. Although now it's Mac versus Android. And so people would have these pissing matches of which platform was better. But we wrote software for that, and I was a co-founder. And part of the reason I was a co-founder is I had really neat handwriting, and I could write the label on these little magnetic strips, and we would sell them to reservoir engineers in the oil and gas industry. And from there, we wrote software for the Apple IIe, and then for the IBM with you writing in Basic A. And if I showed you, I mean, the software was really, really pathetic. But because there wasn't anything, it was just like, oh, you can write a program to calculate the estimated barrels of oil and place in a reservoir in Texas. They go, yeah, we can do that. You need the inputs. And that was great. And you know, there was no packaging because it was a floppy disk, and you would hand write the name of the program, the version, the whole thing. And you would put it in the mail, and they would send you $500. Awesome. Going to the Santa Clara County Fairgrounds, and sitting next to a woman, I remember this, I was telling the story to a friend of mine the other day. She wrote software for the Timex Sinclair, which I know none of you were alive to see. It was a little computer that was sold like at drugstores. It was funny. I mean, people were trying to figure out how to sell computers, right? And so she wrote little software for it, and she sold it but it was on a chip, and she sold it in like little, again, these little Ziploc bags. And so it was like the maker movement now, where people are trying to figure out, you know, there's this new toy, and they're trying to figure out what they could do with it. So that's how I got into software, and that's how I got into startups. Worked for a company like Raycam because, okay, major decision. I was walking down University Avenue, and I was working on this startup, but it wasn't paying the rent. So I go, I need to get a real job to pay the rent. So I walked into a Manpower. Okay, back in the day before TaskRabbit, there were things like Manpower and Cali Girl, and it was basically temporary services. And so you'd go in and you would take a typing test. The only useful class I took in high school, actually in my entire life, let me tell you, was typing. Okay, I used that skill every single day. I learned to type on an IBM Selectric, touch typing, blindfolded. I could type 80 words a minute. Okay, so I take the test and go, great. Okay, we have a job for you at Raychem. I took my bicycle, I rode over, and I became the temporary secretary for this guy in this aerospace engineering firm. And that's how I got into aerospace engineering. It wasn't, I've only interviewed for a real job once. Other times it's been random things like that where I happened to walk into a Manpower, they gave me the job, and I ended up in a material science company, we did aerospace stuff, and I learned all about flat cable connectors. You don't want to know. Learned how to write mil specs, and basically being in a place of saying yes. So whatever the opportunity was, like I got to sit there and type mil specs. Okay, 5.1.3.2. Okay, C spray. This connector will be able to withstand, so many PSI of C spray at this elevation of blah blah blah. It was so mind-bogglingly boring. But when I look back, I looked at it and go, oh, documentation. It's really, really important to document what you do. And it gave me a discipline, right? When I was there, I learned all about local area networks. Okay, before there was Wi-Fi, everything was connected through cables, okay? And so if you wanted to have a local area network because there was no internet, you had to physically run the cable everywhere. And a friend of mine said, oh, you need to go over to Xerox Park and they have this book called the Blue Book. And the Blue Book will tell you how to set up a local area network. So I go over on my bicycle, I pay my $20, I get my Blue Book, I read it, back and I go, okay, I got it. I know how to design local area networks. And we were running cable that I would buy at Fry's Electronics through the ceiling tiles and run it down, and that's how we connected all the computers. Because it was still very hobbyist. And so if you read PC Magazine from cover to cover and read every single ad, you could teach yourself everything there was to know about local area networks and personal computers and software and the whole thing. So my entire computer education came from reading 5 years of PC Magazine cover to cover. And it was self-taught. But by the end of it, I had designed the largest local area network for Raychem Corporation. And I had 400 engineers on it, and I had converted all these draftsmen. Okay, so before we used to have pencils and papers and rulers and these, drafting tables that were really big, and they angled up. And so people would do these blueprints, and we had these machines that you would run the blueprints through. They had ammonia, so you had to have a hood, otherwise you would die from the ammonia. Okay? And so there were these draftsmen who had been doing this for 25 years, and then we converted them to computers, and they had these little 13-inch screens, and it was like trying to draw through a porthole, because they were used to big sheets of paper to draw the parts of things. And so we converted them over to that. So basically I trained an entire generation, and by the end of it, in 5 years, we had all these abandoned tables. They were just made obsolete because everything was done on the computer. And again, that was more the interest, and reading these trade magazines, going like, oh, well this is something about being 22 and fearless, because you don't know what you can't do. So take advantage of the fact that you don't know anything, because it makes you brave, right? I didn't know that I couldn't design a local area network because I read about it and I go, okay, this seems straightforward enough. And I used to hang out with the technicians over at Businessland, which is a now obsolete company, and they were these computer repair guys. And I go, okay, now show me how to do this again. I'd sit there and I'd take, draw, and I'd go, all right, I think I got it. And then I'd go and tell the guys back in my engineering company how to do it. I mean, because I was stupid. I didn't know that I might need to have a credential, or that I might need to have a certification. It just never occurred to me. It's like, okay, I got to figure it out. Okay, all right, okay, Joe, this is what we need to do. And off you go. Great things happen in the world when you don't have a clue, but you have a vision and an idea. It's like, oh, and for me, if I can imagine it in my head, if I can see it, then I can go and do it. And the rest is just details. It's like, oh, it was like studying for that stupid petroleum engineering degree. You just have to gut it out. It's like, okay, trial and error, okay, I haven't got that right. But it never occurred to me that I wouldn't eventually figure it out. So I think that the really fun and exciting thing about being in STEM is that you get to fail all the time, and that's just the natural part of the process. Okay? STEM is not for perfectionists. If you're a perfectionist, leave the room now, because everything that you build always breaks. And I learned this in programming. So if you ever write, how many of you have taken a programming class? Awesome. How many of you, the first program you wrote, did it work? That's right. Right? Because in programming you learn failure. And you learn, okay, I need to figure out how to fix it. And then you iterate, right? And then you cut into this process of continuous improvement. When you have that spirit of continuous improvement, this growth mindset, you can do anything, right? Now I'm at Stanford. I am a behavior designer. Now, what does petroleum engineering have with behavior design? Nothing. Except that there's this intellectual curiosity. And what happened when I was into startups, I ran a technology incubator for women to encourage them to found technology companies. I was a director of consumer-facing innovation for Ricoh, which is a Japanese company. And it was an epic failure. Oh my God, I mean, I went down in flames. It just couldn't make it work. And I couldn't figure out why. And it's like, okay, we built it, we have this app, we have this technology, but nobody's using it. Why can't I get adoption? And it wasn't until I got to Stanford that I got the vocabulary to figure out why people weren't doing things. And so now my field and my career is in the direction of behavior design. What is that? It's thinking about how you get people to do things. Okay? So we have taxonomies and so on, because everything on the net, now because we can measure everything, right? How many of you know Google Analytics or even, you know, how many likes you get on Facebook? You know, that's analytics, right? Because now we can measure things because people touch it digitally. Well, it turns out that if you can't figure out how to move people to take action, most of your innovation will fail, right? So say I design like the most awesome chair ever, but if I can't get people to sit in it, it fails. What if I design, I'm a life scientist and I invent a drug that's awesome for diabetics, but if the diabetic patients won't take it consistently with breakfast, it doesn't matter. Right? So all of a sudden, I realized that behavior design is really front and center for any kind of innovation. And so that's what I've been focused on for the last 5 years. And specifically coupling it with technology that we refer to as persuasive. And what I mean by persuasive technology is technology that gets you to do things that you didn't know you wanted to do. So up until 2007, most people didn't walk around staring at screens. In fact, they had a little Nokia brick and it was like floating around in the bottom of their purse or the backpack. And the screen was awful and it was small. And so, even though you could technically connect to the net, I don't know if you, have any of you used a little Nokia brick phone, do you remember? And the innovation for those Nokia phones was adding new covers on them. Like, you go to the mall, they have a little kiosk and you get like the bejeweled things on them. Like, woo, right? And then the iPhone came along, and all of a sudden what happened was this rapid transformation of human behavior. Because all of a sudden, the amount of people who were texting just went up. And the people who were staring at screens just went off And so now we have all this social commentary about how, phones are ruining people's lives and social discourse. But what it did was all of a sudden it made this new area of behavior much, much easier to do. Right? And it became addictive. So if you can design something, often, I do work in health and I do work in peace. We had a conference on peace, and people were trying to define, well, we want people to be more peaceful. And I go, oh, that's not useful. That's like asking people to be more healthy. Like, I want you to be healthy. Well, that's nice. But if you want to design a program, a product, or a service, you might say, I want freshmen at Kenyatta to go, well, this is not going to be hard for you, to climb, 20 flights of stairs a day. Boy, you guys got it down. I've seen this campus. And you can measure that, right? So my Apple Health app tells me, it passively measures the number of flights of stairs I take. And it passively measures the number of steps I take. And so my goal is to take 10,000 steps a day. Now, if I had to personally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would lose track after about 50, and then, I'd lose track of the numbers. But if I have a device that's counting, then I can check in on it and say, oh, I'm not at my goal yet. Go around the block again. That's very persuasive, and it increases your ability to do that thing that you want to do. But prior to technology, if you want to do that, it's just too darn hard. Or, I want people to walk 4 miles a day. How many of you know how far a mile is? I mean, I don't mean technically like feet. Like, a mile is like, from here to the library or something. Do you know? You do?
Well, are you talking about, like, I run 5 miles a day, so my Nike app tells me exactly how far.
Oh, yeah, right! I read an article in Wired in 2008, and it was talking about this interesting joint venture that Apple and Nike had done to digitize sports. And we were like, what? And so I was fascinated by it, and they were saying, like, yeah, they're going to collect data of millions of runners with this Nike app, right? So there was like this little sensor that you put in your shoe, and there's a little thing that you put on your iPod, and off you go. And I thought, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I wonder if it works. I'm Latina, as you can tell, I wear high heels. I do my hair, makeup. Oh, by the way, one of the big barriers for why a lot of people don't exercise, especially women, is, guess what? Sweat, and because of hair, right? Especially African American women. A lot of them don't exercise on a regular basis because they don't have the time to do their hair. Interesting behavioral observation. If you remember nothing else, stay in school and time your exercise when the day that you wash your hair. Okay? Especially in the drought. I only do hard runs twice a week because I only wash my hair twice a week. So if I'm going to wash my hair, then I go, that's the day I'm going to go do laps. Otherwise, I've got to add another hour to my day because, shower, shampoo, and shine takes time. Got to blow dry, got to curl it. Forget it. I don't have time to do that every day, and so that becomes the obstacle for me doing hard exercise, right? So this is an interesting behavioral thing. So anyway, so Nike and Boot. And I go, okay, I'm going to try this out. I've never exercised a day of my life. I was 48 years old. So I have really good knees, right? Usually by my age, if people are athletic, they can't do things anymore because they ruin their knees, they have shin splints, they have a bad back and all that. I was virgin territory. Virgin body, well, not literally, but not damaged by exercise, right? And so I started using the Nike app. And you know what? Even though I'm not an athlete, I've been running for 6 years. And I have the data to prove it. And it was like that Seinfeld episode, how that he has that calendar, says, don't break the chain, so because he's Xing out things, that's how he gets into habits, right? I don't know if you saw that. So I thought, oh, don't break the chain, I gotta, okay, and so I got obsessive where I would even track my walks on Nike Running, and I go, it's just a slow run, because I wanted to track the miles. And I thought, that's persuasive. And that's the power of what technology is going in the direction that it's going in. So I'm going to wrap up, and then we'll have to do some Q&A. So I'm very interested in humanitarian applications of technology. Okay? I am not a bro who wants to make $1 billion, delivering pizza on a scooter. I couldn't care less. Right? What I do care about is this combination of technology with other disciplines, right? It's supply chain. It's I have a startup who raised $3 million. Yeah, yes. That is going to help small farmers. And there are 80,000 small farmers in California, but there are 450 million small farmers on the planet. And so when you care about food security, you have to say, well, where's the food going to come from? And often people say, well, what we'll do is we'll work with farmers and we'll get them to grow more stuff. So here you are, Jane Farmer, grow tomatoes, okay, I'm going to give you more fertilizer and more seeds so you can grow more tomatoes. And you go, yay, I grew more tomatoes. And you go, too bad, there's no one to buy them, so they're all rotten. And then you lose money. And that's a pattern that happens over and over and over again in rural farming. And so what we did was we created a marketplace platform. It's all software, it's algorithms, it does the logistics, the supply chain, everything else, and it matches small farmers with large buyers. Okay, now, you're going like, oh, hold on, this sounds like you're a distributor. I go, yeah, but you know what? We're keeping track of, farmer safety, food safety, what are the labor conditions, is it organic, what kind of pesticides are they using, all these things, and giving visibility to buyers who care about that. So our first customer, Stanford Dining, is just saying, you know what? All our students want to know the story of origin of the food. Where did it come from? Who grew it? Where? Is it healthy? Is it organic? What's the carbon footprint? Et cetera, et cetera. And so when you get something really old school, there's nothing more old school than agriculture, and you combine it with tech, the engineering, metrics, logistics, being able to write sophisticated algorithms, all of a sudden things that were impossible to do in the past, all of a sudden become plausible. And to me, that's like the exciting part of where we are in tech right now, is this interdisciplinary opportunity. So I'm in a lab where we have behavioral and experimental psychologists, right? So if anyone I love social science, by the way, I should have been a social science major, but there was no money in it. But now there is, because you can combine that and say, okay, there's all this social science and human psychology, but now I'm going to go work, with a pharmaceutical company and help them figure out compliance. How do I get patients to take their drugs on a consistent basis? Because it doesn't matter if we invested, $100 million to come through with a breakthrough drug if people won't take their meds, it doesn't matter. So there's a great opportunity for innovation there. So I really encourage you, if you haven't taken any psychology courses yet, to do so, because it's really, really powerful. You can combine that with software to get people to be better, whatever it is that they want to do. Now I run. I'm not a fast runner, by the way, but I can run for a really long time. I have the data. Then it helped me in my goal, and I still have good knees, by the way. Or you can write an app or develop a technology that helps the elderly with their medications. Or you can come up with something that's going to reduce violence. Or there's a legislation in California called Know Your Chain. Can you create a company that's a social enterprise that employs women so there's no human trafficking? That has a social impact. But you can do it at scale because you have the technology. Okay, I've been jammering on for a long time. Questions? This is the interactive portion before you skedaddle off to your next class. Yes?
Working in startup in some of these projects that might not be interesting for investors, how do you go about getting funding to make these important changes?
There are different pockets of money. So there's social impact investors that have been growing in the Bay Area. There are angels, and you always get friends and family. One of the most compelling ways that you can, if you want to do something that has some social good, you always have to have a business model. It has to be sustainable from a profitability standpoint, right? And the way we do things now is that we create a minimum viable product. You've heard that, MVP, minimum viable product. So you create some small thing, and you see if there's any interest in it. So I always talk about this market pull, because we all, entrepreneurs come up with these great ideas, we love them. It's going to change the world, like, the thing that I did at Rico that nobody cared about, but I thought it's a home run. I have learned not to trust my own instinct on that, and instead go out and verify and say, but do you care about this? Do you care about this? And do tiny experiments to see, so part of it is, you want to see if there's any market demand. Is there any customer demand before you build it? So this is a clever hack that people do, is you create a landing page. You create like a one-page website, and you have a mock-up of your product and all the features and everything else, and you say, submit your email if you're interested in ordering this product. It's under development, and it'll be available in 3 months. And all you want to do is see if anybody cares. And if enough people sign up, you go, oh, I guess I'm going to make it. If nobody signs up, then don't waste your time and money to make it, right? So there are tools that you can do and techniques that you can do to determine that. But then you can go to an investor and say, I did this landing page, And 10,000 people signed up and said they were interested in this. And I have 5,000 pre-orders. Even though this is the great thing about Kickstarter, I have 5,000 pre-orders and I've told them it's not going to be ready for 9 months. And they're going like, I think you're onto something. And that gets investors' attention. Any other questions? Or comments? Yes.
The project that you were talking about, the small-scale farmers.
Yes.
And hooking them up with the distributors. Where did the impetus for that idea come from? And what did it cost? And do the people that pay for it pay their investment?
Okay, so the startup is called Aggrigator. It's misspelled intentionally. And it was incubated out of my lab. So we were interested in the issue of food security. So if you look at the Syrian crisis right now, the antecedents to that and to the Arab Spring were food prices. So it turns out that if people don't have enough to eat, they finally get fed up with their government. If they have a really, really bad government, but they can still put food on the table, they'll put up with that shit for 30 years. Okay? But as soon as literally they couldn't afford the price of bread, that created enough social instability to get people to start overthrowing their governments. So we said, okay, so clearly food security is important to create peace in the world. People need to be fed. How do we increase food security? Well, how do you keep farmers in business? And that was sort of like the intellectual line of thinking. And my co-founder had done this in India with biofuel. And he was able to work with 4,500 small farmers and get them to grow this particular crop to create biofuel. And from that, he learned about the economics of aggregation, saying, okay, any individual farmer doesn't have enough money to buy fertilizer, but if I can create a cooperative, then I can buy that fertilizer for them at a great discount. And that was basically the genesis of that startup. So we're doing a pilot with Stanford Dining this fall, and then we'll be expanding out to other buyers who care about local sourcing. So the pain point for a Stanford type customer is that they're not looking to buy the cheapest tomato, they're looking to buy a locally sourced tomato because they have their own sustainability goals and missions in terms of saying we want to support local farmers, we want to support local agriculture, we want to support better environmental practices, we want to lower our carbon footprint. So if we're shipping produce from far away, that means it's on a truck, so that adds to the air pollution, so we care about the food miles. Right? And so if you want to do that as a buyer, it's wickedly hard to find farmers because guess what? They don't have websites. And so if you want to discover who the farmers are, you're driving around and you're talking to people and it's very, very labor intensive. So this platform is kind of like Amazon or Etsy or any of these, imagine the Airbnb of farming, where these farmers can put up their information and then buyers can say, okay, I want to buy tomatoes within a 50-mile radius. And it has to have this criteria. And then the farmers that match can then do transactions. So that's where it came from. Any other comments or questions? We have room for, yes?
What other disciplines of engineering have you worked on?
I have worked with mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, petroleum engineers, and double E's, yeah. So most of the heavy engineering was earlier in my career. And since then, it's been more computer science, user interface design. I was at IDEO in the 90s, and that was a blend of mechanical engineers, industrial designers, human factors people. Anthropologists are really, really key in technology innovation because they help you understand who your customer is and their behaviors. Yes?
This is more of a comment. This is really inspiring to hear your story, so thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes?
What exactly do you do with the Army Special Forces?
Army Special Forces. Okay, so what's interesting is that after 20 years of being at war, when we work with the military, they're all saying like, well, our strategies aren't working because the warfare has changed. It's not nation state anymore. It's networked individuals, and it's networked individuals who may not be networked yet. And part of this has been facilitated by technology. And so when I work with Special Operations Command or NATO PSYOP and so on, I spend a lot of time briefing them on the human behavior dynamics of social media and social technologies. and how people at a grassroots level are using it to self-organize. So creating these movements, these organizations before took a lot of human skill. So if you think about what leaders, CEOs, and so on had to do, what they need to be capable of, their superpower was managing people and being really wickedly organized, right? And so, and if you wanted to create any kind of organization or movement, the devil was in the details. If you're going to have an event, where is it going to be? When is it going to be? How many people? How are you going to move them in? How are you going to move them out? And so on. But then something like Eventbrite was invented. Okay? And all of a sudden, you personally don't need to be very organized because the software does it for you. So increasingly, we're seeing that the barriers that were there before for people to organize are going away bit by bit because there are all these software applications that can do it for you. Right? If you want to communicate in a mass way, you can do it through Twitter or Facebook. Prior to that, you needed to be like the Pope or Rupert Murdoch or own a newspaper, media. Then you could control the communications, and individuals didn't really have a platform for that. And so, working with the military is getting them up to speed on that in the last 5 years. Certainly 3 years ago, we would say like, are you on Facebook? And they go, absolutely not. And I go, well, they're all organizing on Facebook. And even on NPR today, there was a story about the most recent Palestinian-Israeli conflict and how these different Palestinian groups have a number of Facebook pages. And that's how they're organizing, and that's how they're doing the propaganda, the onboarding, and so on. Likewise with video games. Video games are a huge propaganda tool in the current conflict. So I look at that. You had another comment? Yes?
We were trying to, I'm very interested in changing the way people think we use power.
Ah, yeah.
When you're trying to affect a major change, do you look at smaller changes and then say maybe how we can make people turn off the lights? Or do you look at the...
Oh, you're like power like energy. I thought like power like power. Okay. Yes, actually at Stanford, the Precourt Institute has done quite a bit of work on energy and also energy behaviors. You might look at a company called O-Power. Robert Cialdini, if you're interested in persuasion and influence, he wrote these 2 big fat books on influence. It's like, oh, okay. And it's really dumb stuff, right? In terms of influence and social persuasion. I actually have a slide about that in this deck that I did not use. And it's sort of like, it's like the whole fear of being left out, that's an influence strategy. If you want everyone to do something, you invoke that, oh, I'm going to feel left out, right? Energy behaviors you can use influence and behavioral nudging. Around that you can prime, hence the course in psychology, because you'll learn about priming, you'll learn about conditioning and all that, and how do you do that, either through software or through messaging or other means. Yeah. Anything else before you all have to leave for your next class? Yes, back there.
Yeah, you mentioned taking psychology class in general.
Yeah.
How do you do someone with some sort of psych degree or something like that?
Awesome.
Like
That's great. No, psych and statistics.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? All of you guys, if you get a chance, you should take a statistics class. Why? Because of big data. How many of you know about big data? Yeah. Okay. So Silicon Valley cannot hire enough data scientists. And data scientist is like the new improved name for statisticians, right? LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, if you can fog a mirror and you know statistics, they will hire you in a heartbeat. Because we don't have enough people who can analyze all the data that's being collected. And they will pay top dollar. So if you can really get good at data analytics, you've written your ticket. You're going to be great. Yeah. Okay, one last question, then we're done because Olivia's giving me the let's wrap it up look. Yes?
So which skills or learning experiences do you think that constantly engage into that class?
Learning how to solve problems. I think that's the big thing. It's the learning how to fail and how to recover. Because every person who's taken a programming class learned that they didn't get it right the first time, right? And so it's that perseverance of how do I design something and create something that's small and say like, it's like the potato with the wires and then the light comes up. It's like, yay, the potato worked. And they say, okay, I'm going to add one more thing. All right, that works. Oh, because if you start with something really complicated, you don't know where the points of failure are. And so people who aren't trained in the sciences or in engineering tend to want to do things that are overly complicated because they've never gone through the process and the discipline, the step-by-step process of solving something. And so I think if we could get more of that knowledge, especially with policymakers and others, then we'll have more effective solutions. And with that, I'm done. Thank you so much.